I never thought that a birthday gift could end up being the final straw in a war. One hadn't known I was losing. I arrived at Jessica's backyard party, gripping the quilt tighter than I needed to. 6 months of stitching, and I'd chosen every color to match her life. Soft golds for her kitchen, wine red for the books she loved, navy for her son's old nursery. She didn't even touch it, held it up like a stained rag and laughed. "You made this?" she said, loud enough for all 20 people gathered near the barbecue to hear. Then, lower to Brandon, but not low enough. "Looks kinda cheap, right?" He smirked, shrugged. I caught that little shrug like a slap to the face. I folded the quilt slowly. Made sure my hands didn't shake as I laid the corners flat, as if neatness could salvage the moment. Jessica had already moved on, clinking her wine glass against her cousin's. But that same cousin, maybe out of pity or instinct, snapped a Polaroid just as I turned to leave, quilt under one arm. I took the photo, slid it into my purse like a receipt. And I had one of those too, a real one, from Rowley's Fabric down on Spruce. $124 dated March 3rd. I had receipts, and soon I'd need more. I left without speaking, walked the 5 blocks back to my car, parked near the deli, and drove straight to the house still in my name, 1423 Maple Avenue. It was the house where Jessica learned to ride a bike, where she brought home Brandon that first winter break, shivering but smug. It was still mine, even if she hadn't been home in weeks. The key stuck in the lock. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I sat on the couch in the dark, the quilt folded in my lap, and the Polaroid in my hand. At 6:20 p.m. on June 12, 2025, Jessica called my love cheap and meant it. I noted the time. That timestamp would matter later. I took a photo of the quilt, then of the Polaroid, and backed them up to the cloud. I wasn't sure why yet, but something had changed. By the next morning, July 1st, 2025, the word cheap still sat behind my eyes like a bruise, but it was the phone alert that made me sit up straight in bed. At 6:02 a.m., my first trust app dinged. I assumed it was the routine security prompt I got each week. Instead, it read, "Wire sent, $25,000 from Hope Harrison Education to EXTACCT, ending in 9,220. I didn't recognize the number, didn't authorize a transfer, and the label, my full name tied to Jessica's long-ignored college fund, froze my breath. That account hadn't been touched in years. I checked it monthly, a habit born of hope and caution. Jessica had claimed she didn't need the money, had full scholarships, wanted me to use it for travel someday, but I'd kept it whole, untouched, because promises, unlike people, could be preserved. I scrolled backward. Nothing since May. And then, today, $25,000 gone. I gripped the phone and stared at the balance like it might change if I blinked fast enough. I took a screenshot, 6:05 a.m. exact, saved to a folder named July Issues, a name I didn't yet realize would balloon to nearly 100 files. Jessica's last message was still there, glowing above the transfer in our thread from the night before. Short. Too casual. "It's handled, Mama." Sent at 11:37 p.m. after the party. I hadn't responded, hadn't even opened it until now. I stared at those 3 words for what felt like a full minute. It. What was it? What had she handled? The bank account, apparently. My trust, more likely. By 8:03 a.m., I was on the phone with Lisa from next door. She was halfway through her morning walk, always the early riser. I didn't bother with small talk. I read the alert out loud, word for word. She stopped walking. "That's not legal," she said. Her voice was sharp in my ear. "You need to get in front of this, Hope." I opened my paper planner, the one Jessica used to call outdated. I flipped to the next clean page and wrote in block letters, July 1st, wire transfer, $25,000, unauthorized, underlined it 3 times. The timeline had started, and I would not lose track. In the 2 weeks that followed, I stopped calling it a misunderstanding and started calling it what it was, intentional. I sat at the dining table every evening with a legal pad, 3 pens, and the bitter taste of hindsight. When you raise a daughter, you think the wounds come early. Scraped knees, broken curfews, slammed doors. But the real cuts were slower, quieter. They built up in fragments that I had ignored until they became impossible to miss. Now I trace them backwards. At Thanksgiving, she'd laughed when I brought sweet potato pie. You know Brandon's keto, right? Last Christmas, she asked Brandon to carve the turkey instead of me and waved off my stories with one of her tight, controlled smiles. Those were moments I'd excused as stress or changing traditions, but in this light, they looked like scaffolding, a structure she'd been building to edge me out. April 9th stood out. She'd left a voicemail, clipped and tired-sounding. "Mama, you need to mind your own business sometimes." I had asked about a bank alert, a routine email that flagged login from a new device. I hadn't accused her of anything, just asked if she'd been into the account. She hadn't answered then. But the message sat in my phone now like a breadcrumb I'd been too naive to follow. I reopened every text she'd sent since January and copied them into a document. Flagged anything that mentioned help, education, covered, or handled. By the third day, a pattern emerged. Vague language, sudden warmth before holidays, and always a new excuse for why she couldn't visit. I screen captured all of it and named the folder Prep for Counsel. The most galling find came tucked in my old filing cabinet. Under tax forms from 2022, I found the carbon copy of a $500 check made out to her name, dated March 15th, labeled April Rent Support. I'd asked about it once, and she told me she never received it, but the bank statement showed the withdrawal, and I remembered walking it to the mailbox myself. The college fund ledger, once clean and untouched, now showed a slow leak starting in late May. Not just the $25,000 wire, but 2 smaller withdrawals, $1,200 and $3,300, masked as education travel and admin adj. Each time, she left no trace but the silence. By July 5th, 2025, the pressure had built into something physical, a pulse behind my ribs that wouldn't let me rest until I heard her voice. I'd rehearsed what to say all afternoon while the bank's customer service line played its hold music on a loop. Every script I drafted ended the same, a question that shouldn't have to be asked. So when Jessica finally picked up, my tone came out steady, but stripped of softness. She sounded distracted, the kind of casual I used to mistake for confidence. "Hey, Mama, what's wrong?" The small talk scraped against me. I skipped it. I got a bank alert. $25,000 wired out of the education account. I need to know why. There was a pause. Brief, but heavy enough to feel like static. Then she exhaled. A deliberate sigh meant to place me in the role of the overreacting parent. "Oh, that," she said, too lightly. "I moved it for safekeeping. The market's been unpredictable, and Brandon's friends suggested a higher yield option. Don't worry, I've got it handled." Safekeeping. The word stung. It suggested guardianship, as if I were the one who'd been careless. I heard my own breath tighten. "Without telling me?" I asked, quieter now. "That's not how joint accounts work, Jessica." "Mama, you're overcomplicating this. You worry too much," she replied, tone clipped now, rehearsed. Then came the click of disconnection. Whether deliberate or not, it didn't matter. I sat at the kitchen table, phone still warm in my hand, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. The word safekeeping looped in my head until it became an insult. At 9:12 p.m., I opened the laptop and logged into the First Trust portal. My hands didn't tremble this time. They moved with purpose. The ledger showed 3 transfers over 2 days. $10,000 on June 28th, $8,500 on June 30th, and $6,450 on July 1st. All labeled tuition transfer. Total, $24,950. The routing number didn't match any of our linked accounts. No recipient name, no memo. Just the same cold phrase typed in lowercase, as if hiding behind normalcy. I took screenshots of each transaction, saved them in a new folder labeled Evidence Unauthorized, and uploaded copies to a secure drive. For the first time, I allowed the truth to settle fully. Jessica hadn't protected the money. She had buried it. By the morning of July 7th, my folders were printed, clipped, and organized by transaction. The quilt sat untouched in the corner of my living room, but my focus had shifted. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about proof, paper, and timing. Matthew Reynolds' office was on 24th, wedged between a title company and an accountant's storefront, all glass and tight corners. I'd first met him 5 years earlier when I updated my will. Clean-cut, soft-spoken, but always listening. When I walked in holding the blue folder against my chest, he stood before I sat. "What are we looking at?" he asked, already pulling a legal pad close. I laid it all out. The $25,000 wire, the 3 separate transactions, the account numbers, the check stubs, the annotated bank log with my red markings like blood trails on the page. He didn't interrupt, just nodded, pen tapping lightly against the desk. When I mentioned Jessica's explanation, safekeeping, his jaw tightened slightly, the only sign he was judging her more harshly than he let on. I slid across the printed screenshot of the July 1st text. "It's handled, Mama." He circled the time in silence. "This gives us a timeline," he said, lifting a single page between 2 fingers. "And a motive." He typed steadily for 10 minutes before printing the draft letter. I read it upside down as it emerged from the machine. Formal demand for reimbursement of unauthorized transfers. His wording was measured but firm. No emotional language, no accusations, just a list of facts, bank documents referenced by date, and a 7-day deadline to respond in writing before escalation. He folded the letter, sealed it into a certified envelope with her full name, Jessica Hope Harrison, and placed a stamped copy in his outbox. "I'll email this to First Trust's fraud team. They'll open an internal case if they haven't already." He paused before meeting my eyes. "Hope, this isn't just about money anymore." I nodded, exhausted but steady. I wasn't the one who should be ashamed. Jessica received the letter the next day, 11:02 a.m., signed by someone named R. Blankenship. I kept the delivery confirmation printed and filed under served. On July 9th, the first break came not through a bank or inbox, but by accident, tucked inside a greasy takeout bag Jessica left on the porch of 1423 Maple Avenue. She must have stopped by during the day, or maybe sent Brandon to drop off the aluminum trays of baked ziti and salad, still sweating under the plastic lids. I hadn't spoken to her since the demand letter went out, and she hadn't replied to it either, not by text, call, or lawyer. I wasn't sure if the food was peace or performance, but I wasn't interested in either. I would have tossed the whole thing, but something shifted in the weight of the bag as I lifted it, too heavy for food alone. At the bottom, between a soy sauce packet and a stained napkin, I found a folded receipt, faded thermal paper, edges curling. It caught my eye because I knew the name, Brandon's Fine Cars, LLC, a used car lot 2 towns over that specialized in what they called aggressive second chance financing. I'd driven past it a dozen times and never once trusted the look of the place. The receipt showed a cash deposit, $1,200, paid June 11th, just 1 day before the party where she called the quilt cheap. The alignment wasn't subtle. The money had been withdrawn from the education account on the 10th. Now here it was, in Brandon's name, posted into a vehicle account marked, "Hold for custom." I turned the paper over, no further details. But the signature at the bottom, loopy and juvenile, was unmistakably his. I set the food aside and laid the receipt flat under a paperweight. Took a photo of both sides, time-stamped the image, and texted it directly to Matthew with the subject line, "Unreported use, car lot." It wasn't just about Jessica anymore. Brandon had touched the fund too, maybe even orchestrated it. This wasn't some panic withdrawal to cover tuition. This was coordinated, planned, and stupid enough to leave a paper trail behind and a bag of lukewarm food. A flicker of something sharper than anger settled in my chest. Satisfaction, maybe. I'd spent weeks feeling tricked, maneuvered, but now I had something she couldn't talk her way around. Not a theory, not a suspicion, a slip. That evening, still July 9th, I cleared the dining table again, not for dinner, but for the work of tightening the net. I pulled up the CSV export from my bank account, isolating the June 10th withdrawal that matched the car lot deposit. Then I opened Brandon's shared calendar, the one he'd once smugly connected to our family group chat when he launched his small business site. He hadn't revoked access, and he didn't seem to realize what kind of information lives inside digital footprints. One entry caught my attention immediately. Deal BFC 5 p.m. on June 11th. BFC, Brandon's Fine Cars. Arrogant, sloppy. It was all right there. I aligned the timestamps from the withdrawal, the receipt, and the calendar note into a new column and marked each line in red. The document took form like a slow confession. I inserted screenshots, added source notes, and converted the sheet into a locked PDF. Brandon didn't just benefit from Jessica's theft. He participated, used her access and my trust like fuel. It wasn't tuition, it wasn't even for her. At 10:16 p.m., I sent the packet by secure email to Christopher Brandt, the compliance officer at First Trust. The subject line read, "Linked transaction evidence, urgent." I copied Matthew, added a brief summary, and included the car lot receipt photo at the end, like punctuation. Within minutes, Christopher responded. Received. Initiating internal freeze review on suspect account ending in 9,220. Thank you. Those two sentences dropped something heavy from my shoulders. I didn't sleep after that, but I didn't pace either. Instead, I printed a hard copy of the evidence packet and slid it into my expanding legal binder. I added a new tab, third-party collusion. For the first time since this mess started, I felt ahead of them, not just reacting, but moving first. By morning, the account Brandon had used was flagged internally. Christopher confirmed it in a follow-up email at 7:42 a.m., flagged, quote, "restricted pending verification." They wouldn't be able to touch a cent until the review finished. The money wasn't back, but it wasn't bleeding out either. I stood in the kitchen, binder open, coffee cooling, watching the sun hit the edges of my receipt pile. I'd never studied finance, but I knew how to track a pattern. And now, I was in theirs. By July 11th, they knew I was closing in, and Jessica did what entitled people always do when cornered. She played victim, loudly and in public. The group text started at 8:17 a.m. I hadn't spoken in it for months. Jessica broke the silence with a 5-paragraph screed about boundaries and privacy, punctuated by her favorite accusation, paranoia. She claimed I was violating her autonomy as an adult, that she moved the funds to protect future opportunities, and that my spying was a form of emotional abuse. I didn't respond. Lisa did. A short sentence. Hope doesn't need to spy. The bank tells the truth. Silence followed that, at least from Jessica. But Brandon posted a photo 3 hours later. Him and Jessica smiling on a golf course, arms wrapped, caption "nothing but peace around here." It wasn't peace. It was cover. I called Matthew at 10:03 a.m. and forwarded the thread. "She's posturing," he said, "and that's exactly when you escalate." I dressed and drove to First Trust by 11 o'clock. Christopher met us in the lobby. He'd blocked the suspect account overnight and had preliminary findings from his team. 2 routing numbers connected to Brandon's debit cards matched Jessica's login IPs. The transfers weren't just unauthorized, they were coordinated. Together, we moved into a glass-walled office on the 2nd floor. While Matthew reviewed compliance notes, I opened my First Trust app, navigated to the shared savings account that had once been accessible to both Jessica and me, and tapped Edit Access. A small screen asked, "Remove co-holder?" I tapped Yes. A pop-up followed. "Final confirmation?" "This action cannot be undone," I confirmed. Her access vanished at 11:46 a.m. sharp. We printed the updated account authorization, signed 3 copies, and filed them with the branch manager. Then I changed the verification questions on my profile, replacing old family names with coded answers no one outside my high school yearbook could guess. Brandon's birthday, once listed as an emergency contact date, was deleted. The PIN to my safety deposit box, updated on the spot. That afternoon, I received a message from Jessica. One line only. "Did you lock me out?" I didn't answer, but I saved the message, screenshot it, time-stamped it, and slid it into the folder titled July 11th, Access Terminated. The account was mine again. This time, only mine. The next week churned up more than silence. It brought paper. 2 more fragments of the truth, both unexpected, both damning. The first arrived as a PayPal invoice in my email spam folder, dated June 29th. I almost missed it. The subject line read, Consulting Fee, J.H. Trust, and it looked like junk. But something about the sender, RNS Holdings, rang a bell. I opened it and saw the amount, $6,500 paid in full. Not by me, not from any of my accounts, but the label stung. J.H. Trust. Jessica had created something with my initials, siphoned money through a shell name, and paid it out like she was running a business. I printed the invoice and circled the date, then checked my ledger. The outgoing wire hit the college fund account on June 30th, labeled admin fee, not education, not tuition, just a front. The second came through a mail slip I almost tossed, one of those flimsy ATM deposit envelopes returned to sender for bad handwriting or an invalid stamp. On the back, in faded ink, a withdrawal log showed $3,000 removed at a branch I'd never visited. The signature was mine, only it wasn't. Someone had traced my name, uneven and too wide across the line. A weak forgery. But it passed that day. The bank had flagged the signature afterward. They sent it back for verification. I opened a dispute immediately and attached a scanned copy of my actual signature for comparison. Each time I found something new, I annotated it with a red pen, stapled it to a master printout, and labeled it by source. My binder grew thicker, the air in the house thinner. The facts piled up like sandbags before a flood. Somewhere in that stack was a wedding RSVP dated June 1st. Jessica's response, not sent to me, but posted online in a photo Brandon tagged, "Can't wait for forever." The caption time-stamped it, weeks before the party. Weeks before she claimed not to have any plans. She had planned the wedding, she had paid for consulting, she had forged my name. That night, I took all the documents, PayPal, ATM, RSVP, and created a new binder section. June activity, intent to conceal. I snapped photos of each, uploaded backups to the encrypted drive, and emailed a zipped file to Matthew with the subject line, Pattern Confirmed Diversion Scheme. On July 18th, the lie sharpened from betrayal into fraud. It came in a sealed envelope slid across Matthew's desk, official, sterile, and heavier than it looked. He didn't say anything right away, just handed it to me like a man passing a loaded weapon. I unfolded the pages slowly, already sensing something foul beneath the legal language. The header read, Account Authorization, Internal Custodial Transfer. The name on the line, Jessica Hope Harrison. My name was below it, printed neatly, signature trailing off in a way that mimicked my handwriting from 20 years ago, except it wasn't mine. I never signed that paper. I'd never even seen it. The form was dated June 7th, 5 days before the birthday party. It authorized the full balance of the education fund to be moved into a new entity, Jessica Harrison Trust, a real-sounding name that masked the theft under layers of formality. It bore a notary seal from a strip mall legal center 2 counties away. The number was smudged, but readable. Matthew leaned in, tapped the signature with his pen. She forged this, and had someone validate it without you present. This moves us beyond civil territory. The heat I'd felt for weeks gave way to something colder. Not numbness. No, this was precision. A clean, surgical anger. I took out my phone, pulled up the image of my verified signature from a document I'd filed last year, and placed it side by side with the forgery. The slant was off. The H dipped too soon. The line connecting the E to the L in hope was missing. My hands trembled, not with shock, but with the clarity of knowing exactly what came next. We scanned the forged form, added it to the fraud report already in progress with First Trust, and submitted a new claim through the State Banking Oversight Office. That required a notarized affidavit, which I signed in Matthew's presence before he uploaded the packet. A digital receipt was issued at 11:39 a.m. Case reference #FT-2371-F. On the way out, I stopped at the front desk, requested 3 certified copies of the affidavit, and booked a follow-up appointment for the following week. I wanted everything in writing. No assumptions, no grace. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was methodical. Jessica hadn't just taken the money. She'd rehearsed how to make me look like I gave it to her. 4 days later, July 22nd, Jessica filed a petition for temporary guardianship of my grandson. The envelope arrived by courier just after noon. I knew what it was before I opened it. Legal weight had a certain feel in your hands, like cold brass. The papers were clipped and neatly tabbed. Her lawyer, a man I'd never met, accused me of inconsistent financial behavior and implied that my emotional state posed a risk to family stability. The application leaned heavily on recent instability in financial accounts linked to the minor's future education, a phrase so absurd I had to read it twice. She was flipping the theft on its head, turning my documentation, my warnings, into the very case against me. And then came the part that twisted in my gut. She'd listed my home address, 1423 Maple Avenue, as her alternate residence pending review. A house still in my name. The place where her son learned to crawl. Where his first Christmas photo still hung. Even after I boxed the rest of them up, she wanted to displace me, professionally and personally. This wasn't about concern. It was leverage. She wanted to rattle me before the bank could finish their fraud investigation. Use the boy as a shield and a sword. I called Matthew within the hour. He didn't sound surprised. She's not just playing defense anymore, he said. She's escalating because she knows what's coming. He advised we file a counter-motion within 48 hours, not just to block the guardianship, but to establish a record of retaliatory intent. I agreed without pause. There was no time to sit in the grief of it. The next step was documentation. I gathered screenshots of every financial notice, the forged form, the notarized complaint already logged with First Trust. I added call logs, text message transcripts, a character affidavit from Lisa, and the ledger entries annotated with withdrawal times. Every page went into a new folder marked Emergency Custody Filing, 7/22. I didn't sleep that night. I spent it rereading her claims, tracing the shape of her lies, and measuring how far she drifted from the girl I raised. But I stayed calm, because rage wasn't going to protect my home. Strategy would. The fallout came quickly. And personally. Within days of Jessica's guardianship filing, word had spread through St. Mark's. Whispers started as half smiles in the church foyer, strained hugs that didn't last long. People I'd known for decades looked at me like I'd dropped something delicate and refused to pick it up. Pastor Karen pulled me aside after Sunday service. Her eyes were kind, but she chose neutrality the way some people choose seatbelts, reflexively out of fear. Maybe there's a way to talk this out, she said softly. Mediation helps people heal. She meant well, but I wasn't looking to heal something still bleeding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain the forged signature or the ATM withdrawals to her. I didn't ask how a woman of God could suggest compromise when a mother forges legal documents against her own. I just nodded, thanked her for her time, and walked back to my pew alone. That was the last time I would seek sanctuary in someone else's building. At home, I got to work documenting every call, message, and suggestion that followed. Lisa dropped off a statement the next morning. 3 paragraphs, and her signature affirming that she'd witnessed my efforts to support Jessica and that she herself saw me lock the education account in person. I had her sign it before a notary at the UPS store. It went straight into the custody response packet. Matthew advised we move aggressively now. We needed to show that I wasn't hiding or avoiding conflict. I was building a public timeline. So I authorized him to begin drafting the civil complaint for conversion and breach of fiduciary duty. At the same time, I logged into the First Trust portal and downloaded an updated transaction history from April through July, highlighting every entry linked to Brandon or JH Trust. I cross-referenced them with Jessica's emails, several of which were now mysteriously deleted but had been saved via screenshots. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Every folder was labeled. Every message backed up in 2 places. No detail was too small. Even the bank's voicemail confirming the internal fraud case got saved as an audio file on a flash drive. If Jessica wanted to stand in court and call me unstable, she'd be doing it against a paper wall I had built piece by piece. August 2nd was not chosen at random. I circled the date in red ink on my kitchen calendar, not for sentiment, but because I needed them in a room where lies couldn't stretch. At exactly 10 a.m., a formal hearing was scheduled, not in court, but inside First Trust's main conference room, where policy carried more weight than sympathy. I didn't want theatrics. I wanted evidence, and I wanted their faces when it was read out loud. Matthew coordinated the logistics with the bank's legal liaison, while I mailed the certified invites to Jessica and Brandon, care of their shared P.O. box. Tracking confirmed delivery, signed for by someone with the initials BH. I spent the days leading up to it quietly dismantling any access points they could still exploit. I went to First Trust in person with Matthew and submitted a formal cancellation of every debit card tied to the compromised custodial account. The teller printed the confirmation slips, one for my records, one scanned into the case file. Christopher, the compliance officer, approved the action and noted it in the internal fraud log. I added his initials to my binder. Next, I visited the branch vault. The box Brandon had once helped me access, back when I believed family was enough, hadn't been opened in months. I updated the PIN to a new 6-digit code, removed the second access name, and filed the new key under lock at home. The clerk gave me a temporary seal to mark it. New access, HH only. I pressed the sticker down myself. The last calls I made were to my allies. Lisa agreed to attend as a witness, not just to speak, but to sit beside me, present, visible. Pastor Karen hesitated, but ultimately confirmed. I want to see the truth for myself, she said. That was enough. No press, no threats, no social media posts. This was not about exposure. It was about leverage. The kind that turns behind closed doors and leaves no room for spin. If Jessica and Brandon thought they were walking into a conversation, they were mistaken. What I had planned was a reckoning. And by the time they stepped through those conference doors, I would have stripped them of every soft place to land. August 6th. The bank's main conference room was white-walled, brightly lit, and colder than I expected. Not from air conditioning, cold from tension. Everyone knew why we were there, even before the door closed. Jessica walked in first, flanked by 2 lawyers in tailored suits. Her dress was powder blue, the kind she used to wear for job interviews, paired with a thin gold chain that used to belong to me. She kept her face smooth, jaw clenched, eyes darting only once toward the chair where I sat. Brandon followed a step behind, overconfident in a blazer one size too tight. I watched him smile at the receptionist, like this was a business pitch. Matthew and I sat across the table. Lisa was to my right, calm and steady, with her leather notebook balanced on her lap. Pastor Karen took the last seat, hands folded, lips tight. She didn't speak, but the weight of her presence shifted the room. Christopher, the compliance officer, stood by the projection screen, ready to walk through the financial report, but he didn't need to set the tone. I did. I opened my binder, unfastened the first clip, and laid out the stack. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for answers. I presented facts. First, the Polaroid. Jessica laughing at the quilt on June 12th. Next, the receipt for the fabric. Then the screenshot of the $25,000 wire transfer on July 1st. Each document matched with dates, signatures, and bank logs. I continued through the forged authorization form, the PayPal invoice, the $3,000 ATM withdrawal, and the Shell account routing number. Every piece cross-referenced, stapled, time-stamped. Matthew narrated only when needed, pointing out inconsistencies with a clinical rhythm. Brandon tried to interject once, muttering something about miscommunication, but Matthew shut it down with a copy of the notary ledger. Your signature doesn't appear anywhere, he said flatly, and the form lists a date you were out of state, per your own Instagram. Jessica sat still, hands clasped, the color rising slowly in her cheeks. Her attorneys whispered back and forth but didn't interrupt. They were reading the room, watching the confidence drain from their clients as paper replaced denial. The space shrank with every page. No raised voices, just exposure. I kept my hands steady as I turned each page, letting the silence do its work. Paper has a different kind of weight when it's holding someone accountable. The next set in the sequence were the bank logs, black and white, no room for interpretation. 3 transfers labeled quote, 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 tuition, all traced to a personal debit card linked to Brandon. Christopher confirmed the routing number and held up the bank's internal activity record, initials from their fraud team already signed and logged. Each transaction bore the same IP address, Jessica's home Wi-Fi. Then came the GPS data, pulled from Brandon's shared calendar, still publicly visible until the night before. Matthew read the entry aloud. BFC deal, 5 p.m. on June 11th, before laying down the receipt from Brandon's fine cars, dated the same day, same amount as the withdrawal from the college fund. Lisa leaned forward slightly, not to speak, but to make sure they saw her seeing it. Brandon's voice cracked first. That wasn't fraud. It was a short-term reallocation. He turned toward Christopher, trying to shift tone, make it sound less like a scheme and more like a miscommunication. It was going to be paid back. It was temporary. Matthew didn't blink. There's no repayment schedule, no agreement on file, no disclosure. And this, he tapped the PayPal invoice, was paid to a consulting service that doesn't exist on public business records. So unless you can prove legitimate purpose, it reads as laundering. Jessica said nothing. Not to me, not to anyone. Just stared at the printed emails, the signatures, the wedding RSVP posted online 2 weeks before the quilt incident, while she told me she had no plans, while she drained the fund. The moment the shift became permanent was quiet. Christopher, who'd waited through the entire presentation, stood up, adjusted his badge, and spoke directly to the room. Per our investigation, all listed transfers were unauthorized by the primary account holder. As of today, the matter qualifies as internal fraud. Restrictions on associated accounts remain active pending recovery. Jessica blinked. Brandon's jaw actually dropped. Her lawyers began flipping through their folders with renewed urgency. But it was too late. The story they'd rehearsed had nothing left to stand on. They hadn't planned for the bank to take my side. The tone of the room shifted in a way you could almost hear, like a latch coming undone. Christopher's confirmation wasn't loud, but it cut through every attempt at denial. From that moment, the energy around the table turned. Jessica's eyes didn't meet mine. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She just sat there, spine stiff, as if staying perfectly still might reverse the damage. But Brandon leaned forward, palms flat on the table, trying to reset the narrative. Look, maybe it wasn't handled properly, he began, pitching his voice low like we were suddenly partners in some shared misunderstanding. But it's not like Hope was using the money. It was dormant. Matthew didn't flinch. Dormant doesn't mean abandoned, he said. And use of funds without legal authority is still conversion. You're not on the account. You never were. Brandon looked to Jessica, but she didn't back him. Not this time. Her silence was loud, strategic perhaps, or maybe the first sign that she understood how deep she was in. One of her attorneys whispered something close to her ear. She nodded once, slow and mechanical. I reached into the binder and pulled out the last page. The notarized teller log from First Trust, signed on June 10th. It showed the withdrawal. It showed the teller flag. It showed that Jessica had been warned the account required joint authorization and had insisted the paperwork was already approved. I held it up without commentary. Pastor Karen leaned slightly forward, hands still folded in her lap, gaze locked on my daughter. Jessica closed her eyes. Her shoulders dropped, not in surrender, but in recognition. There was no path forward that didn't start with consequences. Christopher summarized next steps. The account would remain frozen. A fraud report had been filed with the county. Restitution could be negotiated privately, but not before legal disclosures. Any continued use of misrepresented documents would trigger escalation. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there and took in the stillness of a room where the truth had finally outpaced performance. No shouting, no tears, Just the slow dismantling of the illusion they thought I would never dare question. At 11:28 a.m., the meeting ended. Brandon left first. Jessica followed, eyes down, her attorneys walking behind her like anchors. The power no longer belonged to them. By the morning of August 7th, everything they tried to bury started surfacing in places they couldn't control. The fraud report filed by First Trust triggered an automatic hold on the shell account Brandon had routed the funds through. Matthew confirmed it at 9:43 a.m. Status: frozen pending legal inquiry. No more transfers. No quiet withdrawals. No creative bookkeeping. It was sealed like a vault, and every dollar inside was now tagged for review. I printed the notice and added it to the section labeled Recovery Phase. Before noon, news reached Jessica's workplace. Her title was Community Outreach Director at a mid-sized nonprofit, the kind of organization that prided itself on transparency and ethics. Someone from HR called her in. I didn't have eyes in the room, but I saw the aftermath. Her professional profile disappeared from the website by 3 p.m., and Brandon deleted every post with her name in it by evening. The apology texts started trickling in, not from her, but from people who'd watched this unfold like a family drama with commercial breaks. Neighbors who'd once laughed too hard at Jessica's jokes or whispered behind cupped hands at choir practice now called with thin voices, asking if I needed help with groceries or offering to drop by just to check in. Lisa took a few of those calls for me. I didn't need consolation. I needed space to process the wreckage that hadn't yet finished shifting. I spent the afternoon reviewing next steps with Matthew. Civil proceedings were still on the table. Negotiated restitution or full pursuit. I hadn't decided which path felt truer. It wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about forcing her to look at the pieces she broke and rebuilding on ground she no longer controlled. At home, I sorted through older documents I'd boxed up in the first weeks of summer. I found a copy of Jessica's scholarship award letter from undergrad, neatly folded, still signed in blue ink, full ride. She never needed the fund. I'd kept it intact all those years because she once asked me to, because I believed promises outlasted circumstances. That belief was gone, but the money wasn't. Not anymore. By the end of September, the storm had shifted from fire to ash. Less noise, more cleanup. Brandon resigned from his part-time job at the dealership on the 14th. According to Lisa, who still read the classifieds every Saturday, his name appeared in a one-sentence line under, quote, recent separations. No fanfare, no statement, just an exit. I didn't need to ask why. The fraud investigation had expanded to include personal tax inconsistencies tied to the PayPal invoice. He'd stopped posting entirely. Jessica finally responded through her attorney on the 21st. A proposed restitution plan, $25,000 plus 4% annual interest, to be paid in scheduled installments and secured against any future claims to 9 Willow Court. It wasn't generosity, it was calculation, but I accepted it. Not for reconciliation, for closure. Matthew revised the agreement to include a clause barring her from access to any family-held accounts or property going forward, with breach resulting in immediate forfeiture of all payments made. She signed. A restraining order followed. Brandon had returned to the property once, knocked on the door, and left a typed letter in the mailbox. I didn't open it. I handed it to Matthew, who filed the request the next morning. The judge granted the order without hesitation. Brandon was ordered to vacate 9 Willow Court and remain 500 feet from my residence in person. The delivery confirmation arrived, stamped and initialed. On October 2nd, I reclaimed the full college fund into a new custodial account under my grandson's name, locked with dual verification. I named Lisa as the alternate trustee. The banker handed me the paperwork and smiled, asked if I'd like to set up a savings tracker for long-term growth. I declined. This time, I wasn't building for someone else's promise. I was protecting what remained. That same week, I changed the locks at 1423 Maple Avenue. New keys, new entry code, no spare copies. The locksmith handed me the old tumblers in a small plastic bag. I tossed them. And when I walked back inside, quiet house, binder closed, coffee brewing, I noticed something folded neatly on the side table. The quilt, untouched since June. I picked it up and refolded it, smooth and slow, corner to corner. This time, I kept it.